what we have to remember is, first of all, what Jesus said. He said, don't forget that man was not made for the Sabbath was made for man. And the Lord himself, we're told, was the Lord of the Sabbath, so he had the authority in areas as far as how we would observe that commandment. What your brother-in-law may not understand is that the Catholic Church did not change that commandment. The Catholic Church observes the commandment to keep holy the Sabbath, but it does so on the Lord's Day. And the earliest Christians transferred their observance of that commandment from Saturday to Sunday, first of all because there was a distinct break between the Old Testament requirements, the rituals and Mosaic covenant demands dealing with the Sabbath worship and animal sacrifices and that sort of thing. And they wanted to show that Christianity was distinct from Judaism. It came from Judaism, but it was distinct from it. Celebrating the Lord's celebrating the Lord's resurrection and death on the day that he rose from the dead seemed to be the most appropriate. The other thing that we should remember, too, is that our calendar that we follow, including Seventh-day Adventists, is not only a calendar that was devised by the Catholic Church, but also it is a calendar that's based upon the solar year, not the lunar year. And the Jewish calendar that was observed in the time of Christ it follows a lunar calendar, which is several days short of the solar calendar. So the great irony is that even the Seventh-day Adventists themselves are not worshiping on exactly the same Sabbath day as the Jews at the time of Christ, because it's several days off now, having switched to following the lunar calendar. Our calendar that we follow, including Seventh-day Adventists, is not only a calendar that was devised by the Catholic Church, but also it is a calendar that's based upon the solar year, not the lunar year. And the Jewish calendar that was observed in the time of Christ it follows a lunar calendar, which is several days short of the solar calendar. So the great irony is that even the Seventh-day Adventists themselves are not worshiping on exactly the same Sabbath day as the Jews at the time of Christ, because it's several days off now, having switched to following the lunar calendar. Our calendar that we follow, including Seventh-day Adventists, is not only a calendar that was devised by the Catholic Church, but also it is a calendar that's based upon the solar year, not the lunar year. And the Jewish calendar that was observed in the time of Christ it follows a lunar calendar, which is several days short of the solar calendar. So the great irony is that even the Seventh-day Adventists themselves are not worshiping on exactly the same Sabbath day as the Jews at the time of Christ, because it's several days off now, having switched to following the lunar calendar.
Allow me to say that the book of Genesis makes it very, very clear that God created time and matter. God is the originator of time and matter. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 14. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 14. It says here, "Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and seasons, and for days and years." So you'll notice that God created the time measurements, days, years, seasons. In other words, time measurements were created by God. God is the originator of time.
And did you know that we will be keeping the same Sabbath in heaven? For as the new heavens and the new earth which I will make, shall remain before me, saith the Lord. So shall your seed and your name remain. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord.
But here's how you separate the two from new moon to Sabbath. And the Bible shows that they're not the same. Isaiah 66, verse 22 and 23, verse 23. It shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another.
They're distinct.
Totally separate. Shall all flesh come to worship before me. From one new, every month.
One is week to week, one's month to month.
Exactly.
Although he did not set an exact date, Miller believed that Jesus would come between the spring of 1843 and the spring of 1844, based on the Jewish calendar.
360 days in the Jewish lunar calendar.
The Jewish calendar was a lunar calendar, actually about 29 and a half days.
But it didn't work that way for the Jews. They were on a lunar calendar. How many days in a month? About 30. Do you know why? Because much of the world, all these civilizations, they had a month with about 27 to 30 days, because that's how long it takes for the moon to go through a complete cycle from full moon back to full moon. That's where you get the word month, from moon.
The New Jerusalem itself will eventually be established here, and from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all flesh will come together to worship the Lord on planet Earth.
Now, you know, you can look in the solar system and understand why all of these ancient civilizations of the world, they had calendars with approximately 30 days in it. That's because of the lunar cycle. That's where we get the word for month. It's from the word moon, because it takes that long for the moon to go through its cycle. So all of these ancient cultures, whatever their religions were, had a month with about the same number of days.
Now, let me ask you, is there going to be sun and moon in the new earth? Of course, because there's going to be months. We're going to eat from the tree of life from new moon to new moon, and the month is determined by the new moon. Now, if there's months, are there going to be weeks and days? Of course, because we're going to keep the seventh-day Sabbath, according to Isaiah chapter 66. Now I want to ask another question. Which is the day that stands at the very heart of all worship? Let's let the Bible tell us. Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 and 7. Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, "Fear God and give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment has come." And now listen, "And worship Him who made heaven and earth, the sea, and the springs of" what? The first angel's message calls us to worship whom? To worship the Creator.